The time is just gone 18 minutes past 9 a.m. as we kick off this morning with the show. We are in the company of our Al-Ansar listeners in Durban, Pietermaritzburg. One Nation 88.9 FM will be joining us obviously later on, but also in the company of Salam Media listeners. And we are coming to you on the various platforms. This interview is going live on Salam Media's Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel. And we are joined by Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Social Change at University of Johannesburg, Professor Carin Runciman. Now, we are talking about the South African Medical Association. Now, this week they have stressed about misinformation, anti-vaxxer propaganda, and also the riots and fears of side effects with regards to the vaccines. Now, the plan, the initial target of the government was 300,000 vaccines daily, which increased to 400,000. The last 2 weeks, we've seen an average of around 150,000 per day. Now, to understand what some of these issues are, and particularly looking at vaccine hesitancy, we are joined by Professor Carin Runciman. Professor Carin, good morning to you. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thanks so much for having me.
Yes, wonderful that you are able to join us. Now, obviously, we are talking about vaccine hesitancy, and when one looks at the rollout, it started off initially medical workers, people in essential services, the elderly, and as we see the vaccine rollout getting to the younger generation, and there does appear to be some sort of hesitancy. I'm not too sure whether it is an age thing, but younger people are obviously less likely, from what we are led to believe, to accept vaccines than older people.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's what we found in the latest findings from the UJ-HSRC COVID-19 Democracy Survey, is that while the overall figure for the adult population is that 72% are willing to take a vaccine, amongst the youngest age cohort, the 18 to 34-year-olds, this actually declines to about 55%. And this is obviously quite worrying, and particularly as they are next in line to be eligible for the vaccine from the 1st of September. And what we're able to tell from our research is that it's a little bit of a puzzle. So amongst those that are vaccine hesitant, the biggest concerns are about side effects and the effectiveness of the vaccine. And this is true for younger people as well. So there isn't a particularly distinctive reason that young people have for their hesitancy. But one factor that might be at play is that younger people are more likely to think that they are not at as much risk from COVID as older people. And this may be playing into a kind of wait and see attitude to try and understand if they wait and see what happens with other people, that they might later take the vaccine. But of course, the delay in uptake of vaccination will be a problem in terms of combating COVID-19.
Well, Professor Carin, are there any specific reasons that we can pinpoint to this hesitancy on the part of younger people besides the wait and see and to see what the vaccine is actually going to be doing?
So as I said, it's mainly driven with a concern about side effects and the effectiveness of the vaccine. One area of concern is that students are also the most vaccine hesitant group when we look at employment. So obviously students also intersect obviously with young people as well. So it does suggest that institutions of higher education have a really important role to play here in providing information to students. And I think it's really important that this doesn't come as a top-down measure, you know, that the university is saying that you must get vaccinated. What's really key here is dialogue. The concerns that people have, I think, are very rational and legitimate. You know, this is a vaccine that has been developed in a very short space of time. There are particular reasons as to why it's been able to be developed safely in the time that it has. And I think those need to be explained better to people. And I think if we can engage people positively, so not telling them that they're wrong to have their concerns, but rather say, okay, yes, you have concerns, let me try and address them. So it's important that people don't feel forced into vaccination. And I think another important factor is that for most adults, this is the first time or one of the first times in their life they're making a choice about vaccination. Most of us are vaccinated as children when the decision is taken for us by parents or other caregivers. And I think, again, it's a very normal thing to go, oh, right, okay, I have a choice to make here. What factors do I want to take into consideration with that choice?
Yes. What about the reasons given by, for instance, the South African Medical Association talking about anti-vaxxer propaganda, talking about misinformation. Now, obviously, younger people a lot more media savvy, social media savvy, and we see a lot of this information going out on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And whilst, combating disinformation on social media is important, it's also important not to exaggerate the influence of social media. So what comes through very clearly in our research is that very few people give explanations for their hesitancy related to social media, a generalized, anti-vaccination stance, or religious reasons. These are really a minority of explanations. And also where we look at where people get their information from with regards to COVID-19 vaccines, although younger people are more likely to use social media, across all of the age groups, most people take their information from television and from radio. And I think what this highlights is, although people do engage with social media, they may not trust it as a news source. So they may question what they're seeing on social media and are rather using other means to get information. So I think while, as I said, social media disinformation is very, very important to combat, I think it's also equally important not to over-exaggerate the influence of social media.
Yes, and when we talk about young people, are we talking about young people across all race groups, or can we pinpoint to particular race groups where we see this type of hesitancy occurring?
So when we unpack the data, just looking at race and leaving aside issues of age, what we do see is that white adults are much more vaccine hesitant than other groups. So again, although the overall figure for acceptance of a vaccine is 72%, it is 56% for white adults. And I think this is maybe quite a surprising finding for many, many people. It's very clear that amongst white adults, they have much higher concerns about side effects and effectiveness, much, much higher. But curiously, white adults are much more likely to have been vaccinated. So there's a curious puzzle here. And what this also highlights is issues of access. What we're seeing now especially is, although we have the capacity to do many more vaccinations that we're currently doing, and we've got indications that people are willing to take a vaccine, we're not seeing that willingness necessarily convert into the uptake. And what we think this is related to is issues of access. So for instance, if you have a car in your household, you're much more likely to be vaccinated than if you do not. And that's because you can drive to a vaccination site and it's relatively easy. Many people are saying that they simply do not have the means to travel to a vaccination site. And I think this really underscores the importance of taking a different approach. So for instance, if we look at Limpopo, which has been doing a very good job with the rollout, it has done that through mobile vaccinations by mobilizing community health workers, traditional leaders, the people on the ground to really get vaccines to the people rather than the other way around. And I think that's a really important lesson for other provinces if we're going to ensure that this willingness to take a vaccine actually results in people taking the vaccine.
Yes. Now, and just finally, looking at the impact or the consequences of being vaccinated or not vaccinated, and particularly looking at young people in terms of the future, in terms of career, in terms of prospects, in terms of travel. And from what we've learned and what we see happening in other parts around the world where a large percentage of populations have been vaccinated, when we look at things like vaccine passports, travel limitations. Now, all these things are at the back of people's minds at this point in time. So at some point in time, people will have to get vaccinated, and particularly for young people, obviously looking at the future and how the future could be impacted as a result of being vaccinated or not vaccinated.
Absolutely. And I think, again, this is where we have to tread a very careful line between people feeling forced to take a vaccination and people making that actively as a positive choice. And, vaccine passports, so to speak, are not a new thing. For instance, many of us have a yellow fever certificate when we travel. And again, that's basically a vaccine passport. So this is not necessarily new. And what we will need to think carefully about is especially around employment opportunities. What may be shaping employment opportunities there if people are reluctant to take the vaccine. And again, I think what's really important here is the conversation, the engagement, that we do know that over 2/3 of the population do want to take a vaccine. And it is likely that the more people that take a vaccination, that will play a role in convincing others. That's another thing that comes through very clearly in our data, that amongst those that are willing to take a vaccination, having seen other people take the vaccine is a factor in motivating them. So hopefully as the vaccine rollout continues through the younger age groups, that will also make those younger people that are at the moment slightly hesitant, if they see maybe their peers taking it, it may also convince them. But I think these are things that do need discussion. We haven't yet, discussed in South Africa, are we going to have vaccine passports? Are we not? But also some of this is not determined by the South African government solely. It is also about what other governments do internationally.
Well, Professor Carin Runciman, thank you very much, as always, for your time. We do appreciate you taking time out. All the best to you. Please be safe.
Thank you.
Well, that was quite an interesting discussion with Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Social Change at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Carin Runciman. We're going for a quick break. We come back. We'll be talking to another professor, and this time we're going out to Nigeria. We're talking Boko Haram and desertions that could be a tipping point in that part of the world.